Good morning, beautiful people. I just wanted to stop by this morning and share my 2 cents on the topic of emotional intelligence. So, for those of you that have heard the term but don't really understand it or not that familiar with it, you heard it floating around on the internet and cyberspace airwaves, but haven't really had an opportunity to really understand what it is for yourself. It's the ability to understand, manage, and express your own emotions, and to recognize, respond to, and influence the emotions of others. So, what I wanted to do is just sit and talk to you about a few personal experiences of mine and the ideal sense of the concept. And so, as I was sitting here reflecting this morning, I kind of thought about what are some of the things that I'm really proud of as I'm continuing on my journey for to become the best version of myself. And the thought of emotional intelligence came up. And so I had to do a real honest, deep assessment. And the reality is that I've only been privy to the idea and the concept for about 2.5 years, and I've been practicing it more often than not for the last maybe year, 18 months. And so I'm still on a personal journey to really help to develop it and for it to really take hold in my life. And so I'm kind of saddened by that because I've been on this earth over 40 years, and to only have 2 years of really being honest with myself and really grappling with what emotional intelligence is and how important it is in the development of my character. But then more importantly, having a lack of emotional intelligence has been a hindrance for a large portion of my life. And so as I was sitting there thinking about it today, I was saying, well, I know that others sit and talk about it, and some people get paid a handsome price to talk about it, but everyone should have access to it, right? This is not one of those things that you have to go to college in order to gain an understanding of or to able to obtain, right? It's really about coming into contact or being exposed to it by someone else. And unfortunately, if you grew up in one or two contexts, if you grew up in an old school context where you had an old school dad or a guy in the house that subscribed to the old mentality of men don't show emotion, or if you grew up in a household that was devoid of a man and you weren't able to see a man be able to work through emotion, then you probably had a similar experience in childhood that I had. And so growing up, anyone that was born in the 1900s will say that was a different time than what it is now. And this whole concept of being able to address your emotional stability and being able to develop skills and strategies to be able to navigate through emotions is something that most young men just are not equipped with. And so for me, I didn't have a male in the house. And then I also didn't have anyone in my immediate circumference that had any type of experience with dealing with emotion. I came up in a household that was really devoid of emotion. And so I learned at an early age just to internalize things. And so, unfortunately, as I've been making my way through this journey for the attainment of emotional intelligence, I constantly reflect back to times in my life where I wish that I would have been able to get little nuggets of this skill set. My life obviously would have been so much different, and it wouldn't be such a uphill battle for me to be able to become in touch with and learn how to regulate my own emotions. And so, as I look at the first part that I read for you, the ability to understand, I did have that. I've always been very aware and very curious. My mind has always been creative, and being able to sit and daydream and think out things to the umpteenth degree has always been something that I did effortlessly. And so, for me, that was more of a curse in my particular childhood dwelling because I was always curious and I always would ask questions, but apparently the questions that I wanted answers to were things that people weren't comfortable talking about or people wanted to dismiss, or if they wanted to use the term that floats around now in the 21st century, gaslight. And so I grew up understanding that things around me just were not um, good, and people around me were not cultivating or bringing out or planting good seeds inside of me and other relatives, my family, young people, my family. And so me being able to understand my emotions was a great frustration because I knew what it was that was going on and what was present inside of me, but I didn't have an opportunity to learn how to manage those things. And so when we look at things like hurt, deep hurt, right? And we look at embarrassment, and we look at humiliation, and we look at abandonment, right? Those are all things that I felt throughout my childhood, throughout my adulthood, and even at different points in times in my life today. And so the thing is that I've always been very, very aware of these feelings, and inside of me, emotionally, they registered, but I never learned how to manage those things. I never learned how to be able to identify what effect they were having on me, look towards gaining positive steps towards working through those things, and then more importantly, being able to release those things and letting them go, right? I grew up in a space where, the old adage, hurt people hurt people. And so coming up, people around me, they were stuck in their own addiction, stuck in their own world of chaos, stuck in their own lane, trying to just make the best that they could for themselves. And I don't think that they intentionally meant to subject me or my other loved ones to the types of things that we were subjected to. Nonetheless, we still had to deal with those things. And so by the time I was 10 years old, I can just remember like a whole shift in my world, and going from being that kid that was curious and happy and energetic and loving to just becoming very, very hard, very, very abrasive, very, very angry, right? And I understand where those things came from. It came from the relationship dynamics between myself and my mother, in particular, but then also have developing an estrangement from a lot of my relatives. But as a 10, 11-year-old, I carried around a lot of embarrassment, a lot of humiliation. Right? I carried around abandonment. I couldn't understand why my life was how it was in that current state. I was old enough to understand that it wasn't my fault, the things that I was being exposed to, but I was frustrated because I really had no way to get myself out of those things, right? And so the part of understanding emotions is not the part of emotional intelligence that I had to learn how to tap into. What I had to learn how to tap into is the management and the expression of my emotions. Because in my household, we just did not express that we were feeling sorrow or we were feeling any of those things that I deem negative emotions. When I would reach out from those vulnerable spaces, looking for and seeking comfort, it was never there. And when I was out and about, I was subject to the rule of boys being boys. And so I was in an environment where young men lived in the same environment, and we didn't have any father figures. And so we pretty much were raising ourselves and teaching ourselves terrible habits. And so I wasn't encouraged to really, really be able to express how I felt, right? Expressing the wrong kind of emotion where I grew up would get you laughed at immediately. And they might get a bunch of jokes said at you, to which point you had to be able to show no signs of weakness, right? Or else then they would laugh at you about that. So I learned at a very, very young age that I had to just suppress. I had to just internalize how I was feeling. And I knew that it didn't feel right, but I didn't feel as if the alternative was any better. If I were to become expressive and to find my voice and to share with the people around me these things that I was really, really struggling with, one, I didn't feel like I had the support system that would have been able to help me to navigate through that. Secondly, in the environment that I was in, expressing those types of things was seen as a sign of weakness, right? And so one of the things that I wanted more than anything else was to be accepted by the people around me. It's a crazy thing when I think back, because I knew that most of the people around me did not love me in a way in which I deserved to have been loved. But still, every step of the way, I did everything I could just to try to gain their approval and try to gain their acceptance. And so me suppressing my feelings at the expense of not gaining my voice, but in the hopes of gaining that familial comfort and gaining that sense of, friendship and kinship from the people around me, that to me was so much more important. And so as I think about these last 2 years, what I've really, really been working on, I've really, really been working on what's next, right? I've never had a problem with understanding how I feel. I'm always and have always been a critical thinker and have always looked at things from a logical way and not necessarily from a feeling skill set. I've learned how to start allowing myself to position in that posture, but naturally I come from a theoretical standpoint because I wasn't exposed to how to deal with feelings, right? And so that's why it was still very, very infantile in my life today. And I recognize that. And that's something that motivates me to continue to work at it. But being able to manage how I feel and being how to express how I feel are things that I know are the keys to being able to develop stout, sturdy, um, emotional intelligence. And so being able to express these things has been my biggest of the two struggles. Managing them, I found ways to self-medicate no different than anyone else does. And my ways were definitely not healthy, just like most people's ways of self-medicating are not healthy. However, I don't think that my methods of self-medicating have been as damning as my inability to express how I felt. And so being able to express how I feel is something that I know would definitely take me out of an old posture and old pattern of behavior, which I had developed at an early age, which is basically being passive aggressive, right? What I found with myself is that once I've been able to make my way through a thing, I have absolutely no problem talking about it because by then it doesn't have the emotional connection to me, and I can kind of move it into a more of a methodical realm, right? And dissect it and talk about it. It doesn't pull at me. But any of you that go through emotions and recognize it, you know that sometimes being in the middle of an emotion is very, very scary, one, but it also makes you so vulnerable, right? And so what I developed was because I always wanted to be seen as the coolest person in the room, always wanted to be the level-headed one, always wanted to be the one that people could look to and be like, okay, this person right here has it all together. I developed ways of passive aggressiveness in that I would think things and I would internalize things, but I would always be like, nah, I'm good. Everything is cool. You know, I gained that mask and learned how to wear that very, very well, right? But the reality is that every time that I had something that challenged me emotionally, when I decided to just go ahead and suppress it, internalize it, and allow it to just sit underneath the surface and fester, all it did was cause me to become resentful for having to feel like I needed to take the high road instead of being vulnerable enough to say, hey, this right here negatively impacts me. This makes me feel this way. I don't like how this feels. Therefore, I won't do that. Right. Or to hold people accountable for how they made me feel. Right. I didn't develop that until I started really embarking on this journey of dealing with and learning how to gain strategies and tools of emotional intelligence. And so, as I said in the beginning, it's still a work in progress. I'm still working on it. But what I recognize is that managing emotions is something that's cyclical because the way that you internalize how you feel and how you deal with that in some way, shape, and form shows up in how you treat others, right? And so as I look at the benefits of gaining emotional intelligence, I, from the sincerest depths of my heart, feel like when I meet a person, I lead in with the best parts of me. And I want them to see and have access to the best parts of who I am in every single aspect until or unless they show me that I can't trust that, right? Or that they're not worthy of it. Then I withdraw that. But what I've learned in this short period of time is that one of the reasons why you need to learn how to manage and regulate your emotion is so that you can in turn then work on how you actually project to others, project on others, and how you treat others, right? And managing emotional intelligence helps to lead towards positive mental health, which is a new thing for me. I've only really been delving through this whole concept of mental health and what it means for the same amount of time, 2, maybe 3 years. And so I'm still a work in progress with that. But as I'm speaking to you all, I feel like one of the biggest steps is to be able to have this communication, to have this conversation, to feel comfortable enough to share with total strangers and people that perhaps have been knowing me for years that my desire to develop emotional intelligence is something that is at a high priority, and I'm working on daily. Now, there's times where I have met these plateaus because I've kind of lulled myself into a routine, but I've been reminded recently that I really need to figure out a way to consistently revisit these strategies, these techniques, to consistently be present in the emotion and to consistently figure out how to manage and how to express it. And so, even though I'm going through a bit of a thing right now, I think what's helping me at the outset of that is to just be able to just turn on the mic and just talk to anybody, talk to everybody, and even just talk to myself. This is for to be used as an outlet, right? I know for a fact I'm not the only one that feels this way, and I'm sure that there are many more of you that have been further along in your journey. And so I would love to hear comments and feedback on ways in which you've helped to strengthen and sturdy up your emotional intelligence, especially from a male perspective, because it still is frowned upon to a high degree for most males, especially if they're being looked at by a male over 35 years of age or higher, to just feel like emotions are for females, or being caught up in emotion is a character defect. It's a flaw. It's unmanly, right? And so, as much as I want to be the strongest person in the room, I also want to learn how to be comfortable with being the weakest person in the room whenever and should that ever be a case. And so, if you're still here right now, thank you for rocking with me. That's just my 2 cents on the matter. Until next time, peace.